This is Reaganism, a podcast dedicated to exploring where the Reagan movement lives today. I'm Roger Zakheim, your host, director of the Ronald Reagan Institute in Washington, D.C.
On this episode of Reaganism, Roger is joined by Fox News contributor and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Marc Thiessen. They discuss the historic 2024 presidential campaign, what to expect from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and how the race will shape up between Trump and Harris.
Marc Thiessen, welcome to the show.
Well, good to be with you.
Well, Marc, you are with us, but you're coming to us from Chicago, where the Democratic Party is holding its convention. At the time of this recording, we're in day 2. Would love to get your take on the Democratic National Convention. Of course, you're a veteran of many Republican national conventions, but here, obviously, you're there in your Fox perch and as well as columnist of the Washington Post. What's the feel? What are you seeing? Is it what you expected, or are you seeing something different?
It is. It ain't Milwaukee. I can tell you that. I was in Milwaukee for the Republican convention. Now here, and it is a whole different universe. I mean, just to put this in perspective for you, I mean, the whole night last night was a celebration of abortion. And people can have different views on abortion, but they literally have a van here, Planned Parenthood van, giving out free abortions at the convention.
Interesting.
I mean, if that is, if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, I don't know what does. I mean, this party, I remember, the whole night last night was about abortion. It seems like that's their the issue they think they're going to ride.
Right, they had the testimonials
to
from some of women who were in states that had changed and made more restrictive abortion laws.
Exactly.
But I wasn't aware of the Planned Parenthood truck outside. So interesting that you should kind of characterize the Democratic National Convention, not necessarily exclusively what's going on inside on the floor of the convention, but what's happening outside. There's been a lot of coverage of the protesters, those who are protesting the Biden administration and Harris policy on Gaza, demanding a ceasefire, and you have the whole it's like a compound walled off, gated off, and some have tried to surmount the fence, the fences there surrounding the United Center. So I guess that's another atmospheric there.
It is, and apparently the Democrats believe in fencing and walls.
Nice.
They've done a pretty good job of keeping.
Well, certainly they want fencing when it comes to nobody interrupting a Biden speech or a Harris speech, right?
Yeah, but interrupting the way of life of millions of Americans and hundreds of millions of Americans is just fine. I mean, if they did as good a job securing the southern border as they do the perimeter of this convention, we wouldn't have an illegal immigration problem in America today. And the other thing I noticed, I've gone through the magnetometers and through the Secret Service check. They're checking IDs. You can't get in here with an ID check, but apparently they want you to be able to vote without one. So
I see the next Thiessen column in the Washington Post: make their immigration policy their convention policy, ID check, and put up a wall.
There you go.
Well done, Marc.
Thank you.
I like that. Now talk to us a little bit what's going on inside. Joe Biden spoke on the first night of the convention. That clearly was not the way he anticipated the Democratic National Convention in 2024 to go. It was late in the night, didn't finish till after midnight. A lot of tears and applause. Did it do anything, though?
It was the Final Indignity. I don't think if he was the nominee that there's any chance that a bunch of second-tier speakers would have pushed him out of prime time. It was just they just made him sit. This is a guy who the White House put out as reliably engaged from 11 to 4. And he was supposed to speak, in prime time, and they kept him until 11:30 p.m. sitting in a green room waiting for all these lesser people to finish their addresses. So, and I almost felt sorry for the guy until he came out on the stage and after repeating his calumnies against Trump and there are good people on both sides. Stuff about condemning the right-wing anti-Semites in Charlottesville, then turned around and said that the left-wing anti-Semites outside this convention hall banging on the fences have a point.
Well, I really think that is one of the biggest problems with the Democratic Party. Just a quick reaction to this observation. By analogy, the United Kingdom, their Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn was led by an anti-Semite, hostile to Israel.
Yeah.
And they went through a process, that is the Labour Party, through decorbynization. Those people are no longer part of the Labour Party. Some have started their own party and they remain members of parliament, but it's no longer part of the Labour Party in the UK under Starmer. You see none of that in the Democratic Party. It's in some ways, we started this conversation about the protesters that were walled off. True, but you have elected officials and party members of the Democratic Party on the floor who are spouting anti-Semitic tropes or are hostile to Israel and supportive of, if not directly, indirectly, Hamas.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, you got Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, vice presidential nominee, who says that he feels better knowing that Ilhan Omar is in Congress. So it's like, I do not feel better knowing that Ilhan Omar is in Congress. She is a virulent anti-Semite, and yet he embraces her. I mean, look, I wrote a column about this in the Post a while back when all these protests started after October 7th. There is anti-Semitism on the right and there's anti-Semitism on the left, but they are different in the sense that anti-Semitism on the right is a fringe phenomena. It's the white nationalists. It's the alt-right. It's not the alt-left. It's infected. It's an elite phenomenon in the Democratic Party. It is in the halls of Congress. It's in our institutions of higher learning, and it's among the elites here. And the Democrats have not contended with. They spent a lot of time during the Trump years accusing him of letting the alt-right into the Republican tent, of coddling these anti-Semites, which I don't think was entirely true. But they're not taking care of they're not policing their own movement. They're pandering to it.
Well, they allow for it, if not downright support. I mean, I think I take your point. You don't have it in the Republican infrastructure. I mean, famously, you had Steve King, congressman from Iowa, who spouted off, anti-Semitism, racist, and he was removed from his committees. And ultimately lost his primary and was out of the party. Not the case in the Democratic Party. Both in terms of their platform, but the whole party infrastructure, they haven't contended with this. The gates and the walls that we're talking about outside the United Center are just to make sure people aren't interrupting with the flow of the event. But in no way are they seeking to excise this hostility towards Israel and this anti-Semitism.
Well, if you're a protester, why would you stop? You're getting what you want. What do you want if you're a protester? You want them to stop supporting Israel. Well, I mean, you want them to withhold weapons, to pressure Israel to negotiate a ceasefire and to stop the assault. That's exactly what the Biden-Harris administration is doing. They're
true, but that applies
Israel
a level
to
of
stop
logic.
the war. Biden said last night the war has to come to an end. I'm sorry, he didn't say Israel has to win the war. He said Israel has to end the war. That's a very different thing.
Fair point. Good point. But if you look at the psyche of the protester, I mean, Israel and Gaza, as you know, is not really the issue, right? That's a conceit.
Yeah.
What they really want to come after is the United States, is a democratic system, a party system that they want to turn over. I mean, that's really what it's about.
Yes.
And in that respect, that's why they want to be penetrating those fences and undermining the Democratic convention, despite the fact that some of those policies that the Biden administration is advocating, that Joe Biden spoke about last night, would be complementary to perhaps some of what they espouse. We're with Marc Thiessen, who's at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago at the United Center. Marc, one of the things I want to chat with you about is your most recent column in the Washington Post titled "2 Data Points Explain Why Voters Hate the Biden-Harris Economy." I want to get you to just wade into that a little bit, but it struck me as a piece that suggests that the Democratic Party and those organizing the Harris campaign have forgotten those words from a previous Democratic president, Bill Clinton, who said it's the economy, stupid.
No doubt. I mean, look, they for months they were trying to say Bidenomics is working and don't believe your lying pocketbook. The economy is much better off than you think it is, and that fell flat. And why is it? And I can tell you in two statistics. On Biden and Harris's watch, Americans have gone from the highest household savings rates in history ever recorded to the highest personal debt ever recorded. So when Biden and Harris came in their first year, Americans were sitting on $2.1 trillion in excess savings, which means excess savings accumulated during the COVID pandemic that exceeded the pre-COVID savings rate. And then Biden and Harris unleashed the American Rescue Plan, a $1.9 trillion spending plan, that social spending bill that unleashed the worst inflation in 4 decades. And what happened is the American people started spending down that savings at a clip of about $70 billion a month until they depleted all those savings in March of this year and started depleting their savings below the expected rate. So we are now below expected savings rates. At the same time, they began accumulating the highest level of personal debt ever recorded in this country. I think it's something like $17.1 trillion in personal debt. Credit card debt has reached $1.14 trillion, which is a record. The average American has added about $1,500 in unpaid credit card debt to their bills. And oh, by the way, they are paying the highest interest rates in 23 years on that credit card debt and that personal debt, which means they can't pay it off, and it's compounding every month. And so you've got a situation where, because of inflation, grocery prices have gone from a $100 basket of grocery when Biden and Harris took office is now $125, and 60% of Americans are using credit card debt, payday loans, and other forms of borrowing to buy groceries.
Okay, so we got this picture of saddled with debt, no savings or reduced savings, and now we have discussion of price controls. So is that going to be the Harris Waltz kind of response to Americans feeling the pressure? And obviously they're going to bash, kind of corporates as well for giving us this reality.
This is a bad idea from the Soviet Union and 1970s America that is rearing its ugly head again, because the Democrats have no idea how to handle the inflation crisis. I'll tell you a story. I remember, I worked for Don Rumsfeld in the Pentagon, and one of his first jobs was Richard Nixon asked him to run wage and price control, the Office of Wage and Price Controls, and Nixon came in and told him he wanted him to take the job, and he said, "Mr. President, I don't believe in wage and price controls," and Nixon said, "That's why I want you to take the job." Wage and price controls have never worked. All they do is lead to higher prices and shortages. So can you imagine they're going to put the FTC in charge of setting grocery prices? Are you kidding me? And then the other idea she had, which was insane, is like a $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers. So if you look at what's happened under Biden-Harris on housing prices have skyrocketed, and mortgage rates have doubled. That's why people can't afford houses. And so if you subsidize it to the tune of $25,000 a home buyer, what is that going to do? That's going to increase the price of housing even more, and it's going to increase interest rates. So, these people, they have learned nothing. Why do we have the inflation we have now? Because they passed this $1.9 trillion social spending bill, which even Larry Summers, former Obama and Clinton Treasury official, said would unleash the worst inflation in 4 decades. And so what does she propose? If you add up all the proposals she had in her speech, it's $2 trillion in spending. It's the same thing. They literally are doubling down on the failed policies of the last 4 years.
So you have the big government spend solutions to the economy, which, as you've outlined, won't improve the economic situation of Americans. But then you have the Trump-Vance approach. And we, as you know and written about, we're entering a period where the Republican Party is also a party that is dominated, and J.D. Vance is part of it. Perhaps not dominated, but certainly has a strong kind of plurality in the party that is advocating, kind of their statist conservatives, that they too want to see government addressing and involving itself in the economy and addressing these issues. So you have J.D. Vance looking to create a child tax rate to increase the pregnancies in the country. So we also have conservatives this moment looking to government to solve some of these problems. So what is the kind of Trump-Vance counter to some of what we're going to see out of the Harris-Waltz proposals?
I mean, so first of all, Donald Trump is going. We have the continuation of the Trump tax cuts, which are growth-oriented tax cuts. I mean, they did a lot of things that were pro-free market and pro traditional conservative fiscal policy and traditional conservative tax policy in the first administration. I'm sure you'll see more of that. But I think look, we're both Reagan conservatives, and so we believe in free markets and we believe in free trade. And one of the things that we found. And so it's unquestionable that the best way to grow an economy and to create prosperity is through unfettered free trade and unfettered free markets. But what we found was that there were people. We also live in a democracy, and that a lot of those policies, especially the trade policies, were dislocating a lot of people, and they rose up and said, no. You'd hear all these, free trade. There's no net job loss to America when you pass free trade deals like the TPP, and people said, well, there's a net job loss in Lordstown, Ohio.
Right.
And so, we're a democracy. And so if you want to sustain free trade policies, it has to be done in a way that's politically sustainable. So I think what the Trump approach was to acknowledge the reality that we can't have all our manufacturing going abroad. And then we also found out during the pandemic that from just a pure national security perspective, if not an economic perspective, it's not good to have manufacturing of key things exiting the United States. We probably should be producing, even if it's less economically efficient, we probably should be producing some of these things here in the United States, because when trade gets dislocated, or if China wants to squeeze us, they don't have a lever. So there are national security reasons, there are political reasons to sort of soften the edges of free trade. And I think that's right. I think in a democracy, you have to be responsive to the people. And if we want to be a bastion of freedom, we have to be able to not allow, the Chinese communists who are probably the most likely adversaries we might face in a 21st century conflict to have leverage over us through our supply chains. So I think that's what you're seeing in populist conservatism is not an abandonment of free trade, and not an abandonment. I mean, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement was not an abandonment of NAFTA. It was a softening of the rougher edges of NAFTA. And I think that's what you're seeing overall, which is conservative economics tempered by national security and political reality.
Yeah, and I think that would be an approach that many conservatives and Republicans get behind. Those, obviously, of course, who support President Trump and are excited about J.D. Vance, and those who are perhaps more circumspect. Of course, J.D. Vance, I think, has been more skeptical of trade and American leadership in the world. But that's a conversation for another time. Let's get back to where you are in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. Do you think Kamala Harris is going to come out with a bump following this convention? Polls, of course, are quite tight, with not much separating Trump and Harris. Usually there's some sort of bump for the candidate coming out of a party convention.
Yeah, there almost always is, and it's almost always dissipates pretty quickly. So look, I think right now the fact that she's rising in the polls is in a way it's a sugar high, right? People were very down on Joe Biden, didn't like his policies, thought he was too old and feeble, and now you have somebody who they don't know very well, despite the fact that she's vice president. Nobody's really focused on her for the last 4 years, who didn't even make it into the primaries last time. And in 2019, she was out before Iowa. So she never really got a thorough examination from the American people then. They don't know who she is. She's the least examined candidate in modern presidential history to win a presidential nomination. She hasn't been in a primary, hasn't had a primary debate with the Democrats attacking her record, right? She hasn't done a single town hall with voters taking questions from voters, hasn't done a single major TV interview, hasn't held a single press conference, hasn't given a major policy address except for that 15-minute economic address where she spent $2 trillion in 15 minutes. But if you go to her webpage, she has no issues page on her webpage. Literally. So I remember
Well, that's been the critique of Trump, President Trump, that he only has 20 bullet points for his policy. But I guess
at least that's more than she's got,
right.
But I mean, we've fallen a long way, because I remember I was just talking to Karl Rove about this, and Josh Bolton from the Bush administration in 2000. Governor Bush gave something like 15 major policy addresses,
Sure,
laying out a defense agenda at VMI and an education agenda, and we actually published them in a book. And then at the end of the administration, I edited a volume where we went back against those speeches and checked what we had done, and we had basically done it all. So he literally laid out enough of an agenda with policy details, and the speeches were backed up by fact sheets and by specific legislation, and laid out an agenda, a governing agenda, and people voted on that. Nobody does that anymore.
Nobody does that anymore, and
on either side.
And I think the loser on that front is the American people, right?
Sure.
Because you have people coming to office with no set, clear mandate, and the people working for the President of the United States, you don't have clear policy guidance on what they're supposed to do. And what it leaves them with is either which way the wind's blowing or where the bureaucracy wants to go. In both cases, that's not what the American people have voted for. And that's obviously a huge problem. We're going to have a debate.
What we do have that's unique in this election is, until Biden dropped out, but Harris is sort of a continuation of his administration, you have the first time in a long time where you have candidates who are both running for a second term.
Yes.
And so you have a first term to look at. You can see what you're going to get by what you got. And so you can compare the first Trump term to the first Biden-Harris term and get a pretty decent sense of what they would do in office.
Important point. And that, of course, has driven much of the discussion, kind of the analysis as to what extent, if any, does Vice President Harris depart, if she were elected president, from the Biden presidency along policy. And there doesn't seem to be much on that, save perhaps some of what you've discussed before. And that, you can argue, is a continuation of Biden's spending policies.
Yes, I mean, if anything, she would spend more, because she's more left-wing, even more left-wing than she is. I mean, in her 2019 campaign, Brian Riedel from the Manhattan Institute calculated all her proposals, and it was $46 trillion.
I saw that in your column. That is a shocking number.
That's insane. So she probably would have tried to spend more than he is. So that's the only way she would depart from him. But it's interesting, regardless of whether she wants to run away from her record or wants to run away from the Biden-Harris record, the fact is, anytime a sitting vice president is running, they're running to continue the policies of the existing administration. And one historical fact that I didn't know about until I digged into recently is actually why I'm working on a column on this right now. There's only one sitting vice president who has won election to the presidency in 188 years. And that's George H.W. Bush. The last person before him to do it was Martin Van Buren in 1836, after
eighth president.
After Andrew Jackson's vice president won that. So we've had one person succeed in winning the presidency as a sitting vice president.
Van Buren and H.W. Bush. You heard it here on Reaganism. Who would have paired those two presidents together? Although I would say the commonality is that they had pretty damn good coattails.
They did.
Jackson for Van Buren, and no surprise I'm saying this, Reagan for H.W. Bush.
Yeah, people wanted a third Reagan term.
There we go.
That's why they voted for Bush.
Let's close out our conversation with Marc Thiessen, columnist, Washington Post, and Fox News opinion contributor, as well as a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Marc, we have a debate in less than a month away on ABC on September 10th. You noted how
we think.
Okay, it seems to be in that direction. Right, it's never done until it's done, I guess, particularly with presidential debates. You noted how Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, has really not engaged with the press and really left the set speech format. But she really hasn't had to, right? It's been going so well for her. Yeah. There's no forcing function there. The debate, of course, will not be a set piece. Just where we sit right now, how do you see that playing out, and what will you look for?
Well, first of all, I find it stunning that they're only going to have one debate. We haven't had a presidential election in decades where, at least in the modern TV era, where there haven't been three presidential debates. That's the standard, right? And so she allowed Joe Biden to take, they agreed to 2, and Joe Biden's taken up 1 of them, and he's not the nominee anymore. So the idea that we have the most unexamined presidential candidate in history, and she's only going to debate once, is absolutely stunning to me. And it just, but you're right. She's going to have to go out there without notes and speak. So it's a very high stakes debate. And one thing that we have learned in the last 2 elections is that one debate can change an election. I think Donald Trump lost the 2020 election after the first debate. I think that first debate where he came in hot, too hot for Americans. Maybe people were just looked at this and said, I'm not doing 4 more years of this. A lot of millions of Americans just said, I'm done. And he had a very good second debate. By then it was too late. And then we just saw Joe Biden, who with a disastrous debate performance, literally was driven out of the Democratic nomination. So one debate can be enough.
Yeah, debates do matter. They're decisive. Carter and Reagan had one debate. Reagan participated in a previous debate, but Carter and Reagan had one. Anderson debated Reagan earlier, and it was decisive. It was the latest debate, as you know, in recent presidential election.
Also, voting starts in a few weeks.
That's right.
I mean, it's early September. The first mail-in ballots start going out. So it's not even like we have 3 months to go. About a third of the country is going to start voting next month.
Last question for you before we close out and let you go back to the Democratic National Convention. You can watch Marc.
Oh, please don't.
On Fox News. Look for his columns in the Washington Post. But you just noted debates. This one will be especially consequential. And 2020, in your judgment, President Trump lost his reelect in part due to his performance of that first debate. So much of this seems to be riding on how President Trump comports himself. He's very disciplined when he was running against Joe Biden. Critique and analysis has been he's been far less disciplined. It's hurting him now that he's running against Kamala Harris. What are your thoughts about President Trump's performance in a Harris-Trump debate?
Well, he did a great job in the debate with Biden. He didn't interrupt. He didn't jump in. I mean, I think the rules actually that the Democrats insisted on benefited him enormously. If he comports himself in a similar way and keeps it focused on her record, and all the rest of it, it'll be successful. If he starts doing what he did at the National Black Journalists Association, it could be a disaster. He could either win it or lose it. I think it will be very hard for Kamala Harris to win the debate or win the election, but Trump could lose it.
Marc Thiessen, thank you so much for coming on the show and being with us on Reaganism.
All right, take care. Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Reaganism. New episodes premiere weekly every Monday on YouTube and all podcast streaming platforms. If you like this episode, be sure to let us know and share with a friend.